In the following video, we'll see an example of an IEP meeting that didn't go so well. Take a minute to think about the components of this IEP meeting and what exactly didn't go well. What can you draw on from the lecture on nonviolent communication? And what suggestions might you give to this team to improve their communication in the IEP process?
Well, welcome back to our IEP meeting. I think before we get started, it would be good for everybody to introduce themselves. I'm Bruce Goldstein. I'm the Director of Special Education for the school district.
I'm Sue Griebler, the first grade teacher at Jones Elementary.
I'm Joe Frisetta. I'm Reed's dad.
I'm Gail Frisetta. I'm Reed's mom.
I'm Virginia Stern. I'm the speech-language pathologist at Kennedy School.
Glad to have you here. I think we had a very good first meeting, and we're here now to deal with the issues that we left open from the last meeting. We're talking about placement for Reed and services.
Right.
Did you have an opportunity to get to the Kennedy School?
No, we really didn't. You know, that's a 20-minute ride from our house, and it's pretty far. And that's really not what we want for Reed anyway. We really think he belongs in a normal classroom. And so I really didn't see the need to go there.
It is unfortunate. The Kennedy School is a school that we're really proud of in the school district. We've designed it for children with hearing losses. Maybe we could have Mrs. Stern at least tell you a little bit about the program there.
I'd be glad to. The Kennedy School has 55 children with communication disorders, all sorts of communication disorders, including children who are deaf and hard of hearing. And we have developed a very fine program for those students at Kennedy School.
That's exactly the environment we don't want Reed in. We want him in a mainstream school. We don't want him in that type of environment.
Yeah, we just moved him out of a school where he was with 8 other deaf and hard of hearing kids in his classroom, and that was the problem. He wasn't getting socialization there. They had the same language delays that he did, and he didn't have any role models for language.
Well, at the Kennedy School, what we've got really is the best of all possible worlds. We were talking about Reed maybe in the morning or for half the day he would be in a regular classroom, and then in the afternoon he'd be in the separate room with Mrs. Stern, who's really going to be able to work intensively on some of these services. Our concern, I think, Reed has a language delay. What is that, Mrs. Stern?
I would say 18-month delay, yes, 18-month delay.
Well, with an 18-month delay, we're concerned about, Reed just going into the regular classroom for the whole day.
I think he needs a full-time aide in the classroom that's going to help him with socialization with the other children. And we also think that he needs 3 therapy sessions a week with a speech-language pathologist. That's what we want for him.
Well, let's try to parse this out and take it piece by piece. Mrs. Griebler, at Jones Elementary in the first grade, how large can that class be?
It's usually between 20 and 25 students. But I do not have a full-time aide in that classroom. I only have an aide for special activities.
I think that with a large class like that, coming from a small class setting in the private school, we're concerned that with the language delay, Reed might really struggle in that classroom.
The language delay that you're talking about, 18 months, isn't what we had him tested at. That's your own testing.
Well, we haven't seen any other testing that would show anything to the contrary, and we have to go with objective data based upon the appropriate tests. We are concerned providing an appropriate placement for Reed, and we want him to succeed and to do well. You're speaking about wanting him to be in a mainstream setting. Well, we give that in the morning at Kennedy, but then we can give him the intensive services to work on those.
Why are you trying to hold back this child?
We're actually trying to provide him with the supports that will...
No, Mr. Goldstein, you're not. We want him to have 3 therapy sessions a week with a speech-language pathologist, and that's going to help close the gap. And having a full-time aide in the classroom is really going to help him with his socialization skills. That's what we want, and that's what he really deserves.
Well, let's talk about those socialization skills. You're talking about having an aide, but that aide is going to be in between his interactions with the other children if we provide that at the Jones School. I mean, wouldn't that be your experience, Mrs. Griebler?
I would think so.
I mean, we want him to be able to interact with his peers, but at the Kennedy School, where we've had this program designed for children with hearing loss and specifically for deaf children, the teachers are used to having deaf children there. Have you had, and Mrs. Griebler, if you had any deaf children in your
You know,
class?
it's such
He's
a
not
low
going to be really
incidence.
able to reach his full potential being in a Kennedy school.
What experience have you had, Mrs. Griebler, in terms of dealing with children who are deaf?
I have not had a deaf child in my class. You know, it's a very low incidence handicap. And I've had some hard of hearing children in the past.
You're going to have more kids coming along that are fit that exact mold that Reed is in, and the mainstream schools are going to have to accommodate these kids. That's all there is to it. And Reed is going to be the starting point.
Well, what we have at Kennedy is actually a program that's designed to deal with this low incidence disability, where we've concentrated resources so that he can be in a regular mainstream setting and then also get the intensive services in the afternoon, and then we don't have to have this aid to deal with the socialization issues.
Right, and with 55 children with communication disorders at Kennedy School, we can plan much more efficiently to give each child the therapy he or she needs.
And you want to have somebody who's got experience with deaf children, whereas at the Jones School, we wouldn't be able to provide that service. We've designed a program that's intensively for students who are deaf and other communication.
But they're all children that are deaf and have other communication disorders. He needs to be in a classroom where he has language role models that he can model after.
Well, he will have that in the morning because that would be a regular classroom at Kennedy, so he'll get that opportunity. But then in addition,
They're
he'll
not
get
the goals we agreed upon here. We're not going over the same material here. This is different. So that's not what we agreed on.
not disagreeing on the goals. We're saying what's the best way to get to those goals. And, you know, we've got a lot of experience in the district working with children who are deaf, and this is what we think is really going to provide him the supports to enable him to succeed, as opposed to dropping him into a situation where he doesn't have the supports.
Mr. Goldstein, you don't understand. Reed deserves this opportunity to be in his neighborhood school. And I am very upset that you're not willing to even listen to or consider our wants and needs for our child. We know him best.
In this video, we'll be considering ways of developing IEPs that are family-centered. First, we'll take a look at the requirements, the legal requirements for an IEP, and then we'll think about ways that we can incorporate other pieces of recommended and best practice in developing IEPs, including thinking about invitational education and nonviolent communication. We'll talk about the components of the Kentucky IEP form, and we'll review a couple of videos and have an opportunity to critique and think about IEPs that we develop. First, there are required people. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act says that a number of categories of people must be present at the IEP meeting. The first is the family. Family members, the parents are the most important people, along with the student that are supposed to be at the IEP meeting. The student is supposed to be present when appropriate, and this is a judgment call that IEP teams make on when it's appropriate for students to be present during the IEP. Often, though, students are not included at a young age. IEP teams think it's not appropriate to be discussing the student's disability or strengths or areas of concern with the student present. And I think that sometimes that decision is made because the team feels it's not appropriate, but when in fact the student would have a lot to contribute, even from an early age. We are not tricking students by not including them in the IEP meetings. They're aware when they have struggles, they're aware when they're behind, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be openly discussing a student's strengths and areas of concern with that student from a very early age. Sometimes we may decide, as you'll see in one of the example videos, that students may participate in part of the meeting and dismissed earlier from the meeting so that you can discuss concerns that you might like to discuss without the student present. Also at the meeting, at least one of the students' general education teachers should be present. We'll talk later when we think about best practice about how to involve all of the students' teachers, but at least one must be present at the IEP meeting. There also must be at least one special education teacher present at the meeting. Fifth, there must be a representative of the school district, of the local education agency, as IDEA says. This can be a principal. In Kentucky, the representative of the local district is the special education facilitator. This position is not included in all states' systems. Different districts handle this in different ways, but in Kentucky, there is a special education facilitator. There should also be someone that is knowledgeable of the students' testing results, the evaluation instruments that were used, and has the ability to interpret assessment results. And finally, anyone that the family sees as an expert who could be helpful, or anyone that the district sees as an expert who could be helpful in creating a high-quality, meaningful plan for the student, can be invited to the meeting. There are required components of the actual IEP document. And so first we'll go through the required components, next we'll talk about the required procedures, and then we'll talk about best practice. The required components of the IEP include, first, the student's present level of performance, including the student's strengths, areas of concern, and how the disability manifests within the general education curriculum. How does the disability affect the student's performance in school? One piece of this present level of performance that's important to talk about is the area of strengths. Oftentimes, the strengths are briefly listed with lots and lots of words about the concerns. And I'd like to urge you to use as many words to talk about a student's strengths as we use to talk about concerns. We have plenty of positive things to say about students, and we should always build on the positive and take a promotional perspective, promotional approach toward to the IEP. The next component that is required includes measurable annual goals, including how and how often each of these goals will be measured. Formerly, IDEA required benchmarks, the short-term objectives essentially leading up to the annual goal. This is no longer a federal requirement, but most states can still include measurable short-term objectives, and it is considered best practice to include short-term objectives or short-term benchmarks toward the annual goal. Third, the services and aids that are needed to support the student to achieve the goal, including when the services will begin, how often they'll be delivered, the duration of the services, and where they will be provided has to be included in the IEP. Related to that, we also have to document the extent to which any services will be provided outside the general education classroom. Remember, least restrictive environment says that we must educate students and support students to the greatest extent possible in the general education classroom, in their least restrictive environment, in the environment closest to the general education classroom that allows them to reach their educational goals. Next, we must include the accommodations, modifications that are needed within the classroom, and those modifications or accommodations needed on local and state assessments so that we can ensure that those state assessments are measuring students' true skills and we're measuring those with validity. We'll talk about this concept more when we talk about writing goals and designing intervention plans. And last, a transition plan for all students who are 16 years of age must be in place that outlines how the student will transition from educational services into adulthood. And best practice says these really need to be in place or at least started by the time the student is age 14. The required procedures, you'll see parallel the required components of the IEP. You'll see that verbs are included here instead of nouns, but this gives you an idea of the procedures that we have to go through to meet the letter of the law, the letter of IDEA. First, we must inform the family in writing of the date, time, purpose, and location of the IEP meeting. We also must inform the student if the student is at least 14 years old. We have to give a family a copy of all the evaluation results before the IEP meeting. We must review the student's developmental progress and current level of performance as part of the IEP meeting. All participants must have the ability to share their priorities for the student, including families, of course. We must generate measurable goals and a schedule for measuring and reporting on the student's progress on these goals to families. We identify the services and aids, supports that are needed for the student to be successful within the IEP. And we have to justify the extent to which the student will not participate in the general education classroom. We have to document the timeline of when services will begin, how often they will be delivered, the duration of each instance of a service. So if we say speech therapy will be delivered once per week, we also have to say for how long. So is it once per week for 30 minutes? And then we give an end date for those services as well. Usually the end date is the end of the IEP period of time, unless we're only anticipating giving supports, a particular support for a short period of time. An example of that might be orientation and mobility. So we may have a student who has visual impairment and we want to provide orientation and mobility for the first 9 or 10 weeks of the school year, or first 3 or 4 weeks of the school year. So in that's an example of a time where the end date might be sooner than the end of the IEP year. Next, we list the names and qualifications for all personnel who will be providing supplementary aid services, special instruction, or related services. Although you will notice on the Kentucky IEP, the names of people are not listed, only the category. So it will just say speech therapist instead of the name of the therapist. And I imagine the reason that some districts choose to do this is so that if the person changes, they don't have to reconvene the IEP meeting team to get together to approve that change. 10th, we determine the accommodations needed for the classroom, state, or district assessments. If we are saying on the IEP that we suggest accommodations on state or district assessments, those have to parallel the accommodations that we make within the classroom. So if we're saying a student needs time and a half, needs extended time in order to take a state assessment or to take the ACT, for example, we have to, this has to parallel an accommodation that we're suggesting within the classroom. So we must be suggesting that the student has time and a half in classroom assessments of the same type. And finally, we have to summarize orally on paper the major decisions and responsibilities of all parties. And at this point, the people on the team, the people who are present for the meeting, sign the IEP. Now, you'll notice in your book, figure 10.3 includes those required procedures that I just went through, those pieces that are part of IDEA, and a whole lot more. This is an excellent figure for everyone to think of like a checklist when you're going through the IEP, because it includes the required components, but also those components that are recommended practice. So in addition to the legal requirements, there are a number of other things that we should be doing, and we can really lean on a lot that we've already learned and talked about this semester for the other pieces that we should do. IEP processes aren't only about meeting the letter of the law, but also meeting the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law is that IEPs should be a collaborative team process for developing a high quality plan for students. So we want to appoint a service coordinator, a person who's in charge of organizing the meeting and the paperwork and the participants. In Kentucky, this is the special education facilitator. It's handled in other ways in other states and districts. Second, this often doesn't happen, but we want to ask families their preferences. When are you able to come to a conference about your child? And we want to accommodate their schedules. We need to find out when they're working, when they're available, when would be the easiest time for them to attend. Sometimes it's outside of school hours, and we need to do our best to accommodate these schedules. Certainly we meet the letter of the law if the family says they can't attend during school hours, but we're not meeting the spirit of the law if we don't accommodate their schedules, remembering that the family members are the most important team members, including the student. Next, we want to arrange for a translator if that's needed. We want our meetings to be accessible to families, and so we need to do our best to make sure that we are communicating well with families and in a language that they can understand. Sometimes we're working with families who speak a language that is not available for translation. We do not have a translator available to us. We can think of ways to use technology, and oftentimes there are errors when we use technology like Google Translate and other applications, but it can help. These pieces of technology can be useful to us when a translator is not available for us. The fourth item is also something that we don't always do. We want to help families with logistics of attending the meeting. Sometimes families have difficulty with transportation or difficulties with childcare. And although this is not a legal requirement, it is in accordance with the spirit of the law that we help families attend. We show them how important their participation is in this planning meeting. We want to prepare ahead of time by carefully reviewing the assessment results, making sure families understand the assessment results and why their child is eligible ahead of time. We don't need to be spending the time during our planning meeting going over the details of assessment results unless a family asks that we do. We need to do that ahead of time. And then we also need to carefully review the student's IFSP or IEP that was active the previous year. Even though only one member of the general education faculty must be present at the IEP, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't involve all members, all of the students' general education teachers. And we can do this by meeting informally as a group ahead of time to share concerns, to share strengths, to share priorities, and the service coordinator or special education facilitator can summarize those thoughts and bring them to the IEP meeting. When we begin the meeting, it is important that we greet everyone warmly, by name, not title. I talked last time about how we often call parents mom, hi dad, and how we don't want to do that. We want to greet each person by name and warmly and with a smile, and professionally, but not in a sterile way, in a very warm way. We can have name tags or place cards available for all participants. It can be hard to remember everybody's name, especially for families who may be a little bit anxious about this meeting. It can be helpful to have a reminder of everyone's name who's participating. We also want to start by just having some informal, relaxed conversation about anything to sort of get everyone relaxed for the meeting and not feel that it is a stuffy, all business kind of meeting, that we're there to have a positive, collaborative team conversation. We want to discuss the agenda ahead of time. The facilitator or service coordinator and all the teachers and service providers have participated in a lot of IEPs and know what the agenda, how the agenda is to unfold. But the family may be new to this, or the family may be at a new school that might handle IEP meetings a little bit differently. So we want to start the IEP meetings with telling everyone what to expect. This is what we're going to do today. This is how much time we have. You can ask all members how much time they have and clarify that if we run out of time, this is what we've got to get through. If we run out of time today, we have to conclude at this time, but if we run out of time, we can schedule another meeting to accomplish our agenda. We always want to begin the meeting talking about positives. Share and celebrate successes of the student. Always start in this way. This is so important for all families to hear. Probably most important for families who have students with significant disabilities to hear the positive. Also for students who are having challenging behaviors. Many times the only contact families get from the school are about the challenging behaviors. We have to remember to use lots of words to describe the positives, the strengths, so that we can use those positives and strengths as a foundation to build support. We also want to ask families if they need to have their rights clarified. We have to share families' rights with them as part of the meeting. And so many families have participated in IEP meetings for years, and at this meeting it's probably not necessary to read their rights as families receiving services again, but we always offer to clarify their rights for them. During the meeting, again, we don't necessarily need to go through all of the test results. The person who is there representing that piece of it might feel that he or she is not doing the job unless we go through all of the results. But really that person's role is to clarify, to answer questions. We don't really need to go through all the testing results at the IEP meeting. We can save a lot of time that we spend really on the meaningful planning if we're not using the IEP meeting time to go through test results. We want to, as much as possible, there's a lot of special ed language, lingo, acronyms, jargon. We want to avoid that as much as possible and use family-friendly language. Sometimes we forget which pieces of our language are jargon, so it can be helpful to sort of step back and think about the words that we use and what is jargon and what is everyday language. Of course, many families who've been involved with special education for a long time have acquired that language. So you'll moderate that depending on the family and the family's experience with special education. We do want to share the results of the routines-based interview or MAPS process that we've gone through to think about a student's future and current routines and how the student is performing in everyday routines. This can be a great way to organize our thoughts instead of by discipline, the OT goals, the PT goals, the special ed goals, instead to be thinking about the student's goals and as they are situated within routines. We want to encourage families at the meeting to share their vision for their child. We want to summarize strengths. We want families to weigh in on all of the conversation and share their strengths. This is a good time to remind everyone that when the family is speaking, everyone's phone should be off. We should be looking at the family and using all the active listening skills that we've talked about this semester. We really want to be all using that, not just the recorder, but every member of the team should be looking at the family, listening actively. We want to assure families that all decisions we're making will be made as a team and that they are the most important, they and the student are the most important part of this IEP team. We are here to serve you, we're here to support, and we'll be making decisions as a team. We want to identify families' preferences for communication. In this digital age, the options for communicating with families have increased. So some families may prefer written notes home. Other families may prefer email or texting or phone calls. We want to find out how families prefer to be contacted. Much like when you visit a physician's office, oftentimes they'll ask, do you want to be texted? Do you want to be called? Is it okay to leave a message? Of course, we have privacy issues with any kind of any kind of communication, and we want to ensure families' privacy and that we are attending to their preferences for communication. And finally, we want to affirm the value that families bring to the meeting, that families are the constant in their child's life, back to family-centered philosophy from our very first lecture in this course. We want to remind families the most important role that they play throughout a child's life, and are most appreciative of their support in the planning process. Now let's take a look at Kentucky's IEP form and how the required components from IDEA look here in Kentucky. This is the first page of the IEP form. You can see that we have the basic student demographics in the first section of the form. It includes the student's name, ID number, grade, school, disability. So this is the official category under which the student qualifies for special education services. This next section is the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So the present level of performance section. It is required that you either check the box indicating the student is performing commensurate with similar age peers, or that you provide a description of strengths and areas of priority. I would encourage you to include strengths even when you're selecting the box that it is not a concern or performance is commensurate with same age peers. Perhaps not in every box, but as you can see here, there are even boxes where, for example, academic performance is not a concern, but we did indicate strengths in that area. So I would encourage you to really use a lot of words to describe the student's strengths and not only meet the requirements of the law here, but also the spirit of the law again. Transition needs, if the student is not 14 years old yet, you can click that this is not an area of concern. Okay, this is the second page of the IEP, and this is where we consider the special areas that IDEA requires that we address within the IEP. We have to include a description if the child's behavior is challenging and impeding performance of the child or of other students. And if you do check that this child is demonstrating challenging behaviors, then you have to also include a behavior intervention plan. We need to consider if the student is an English learner. Kentucky still on their forms uses the words limited English proficiency. So we check the appropriate box there that either the student is or is not an English learner. If the student is experiencing delays because of language acquisition, then we need to describe how that interacts with how the student is performing in school. In other words, to what extent is what we're seeing a natural result of acquiring a new language, and to what extent do we believe that it is due to disability. Next, we need to indicate whether the student has sensory impairment, so is the student visually impaired or blind, and if the student does have visual impairment, we need to check whether we're using Braille, instruction in Braille, and if Braille is the primary mode of written communication. If the student has communication needs, we need to describe what those communication needs are, or check the box that the communication status was covered, as in this example, in the present level of performance. The second area of sensory impairment is the child hard of hearing or deaf. We need to check if those categories are met or not, and give an indicator of how that interacts with communication. Again, we can check the box saying that communication has been discussed in the present level performance page, or we can add additional information as that's relevant. Finally, we need to discuss assistive technology if that's needed, and if assistive technology is needed, then we need to complete the statement of devices and services below. And in this example, we will include discussion of especially the supplemental devices, the assistive technology under specially designed instruction, supplemental aids and services, and behavior intervention plans. The third page of the Kentucky IEP form is where we list goals and benchmarks and specially designed instruction and ways that we intend to measure. So in the first section, we write the annual goal. So the example that I have here is a transition goal. When it is time to transition from centers to large group, from playground to inside, from the classroom to the lunchroom, and from the bus to the classroom. So 4 occasions. Elise will quietly follow the routine within 15 seconds of an auditory prompt. If we're including specially designed instruction, we describe how we will use that instruction, those evidence-based strategies, in the next large text box. Under review of progress of annual goal, for each interval that we intend to send home formal reports of progress, we need to select what type, what method of measure we intend to use. And so in this example, we intend to use authentic assessment to indicate how Elise transitioned. We'll send home reports of progress 4 times over the year in the same schedule as report cards. And you can see under the schedule, we have options. We can either say we will send progress reports on IEP goals home at the same schedule, along the same schedule as report cards, or we can choose another schedule. And the final section is the benchmarks. In the benchmark section, we show the smaller steps toward meeting the annual goal. And since we have 4 reporting periods over the year in this example, it makes sense to have 4 benchmarks so that we could see at the end of each reporting period, we should see that the student meets the benchmark. And so you'll see that the 4th benchmark is the same as the annual goal. On the next page of the Kentucky IEP, we list the supplementary aids and services and accommodations that are required to support the student. And for supplementary aids and services, we discussed that Elise will continue to use the iPad application for communication within the school setting. Under accommodations for administration of state assessments and assessments in the classroom, we check the boxes that she'll be able to use assistive technology and that we'll use reinforcement and behavior modification strategies. And these strategies are consistent with what we will use in the classroom and what we would find on Elise's intervention plans. On this page of the Kentucky IEP form, we list the services that will be provided, the frequency, when they begin, when they end, and the duration of each occurrence. So you can see on Elise's example, she will be receiving special education or special instruction services 30 minutes twice per week. We have a begin date and end date that is the same as the IEP period, so we anticipate delivering this service the entire IEP period. Again, Kentucky's IEP does not list the name of the service provider, but rather the position. So the special education teacher is providing this service, and the location it will be delivered is within the general education classroom. We also see that Elise is receiving a related service. Related services, remember, are like speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. A vision specialist may provide orientation and mobility services, for example. And in Elise's example, she'll be receiving speech and language therapy 30 minutes once per week. Again, beginning and end date are the same as the IEP beginning and end date by a speech and language pathologist and within the general education classroom. The final page of the IEP is where we discuss if a student needs extended school year in order to meet annual goals or in order to maintain progress. In this example, we've determined that Elise does not require extended school year. We also discuss transition needs beginning at the time that the child is 14 years old and thereafter. We've not included that for Elise since she is a younger student. The next video is an example of an IEP that goes much better than the one that we saw at the beginning of this video. But are there still places where we might offer critique? Are there still elements that we might change in the future? I see a couple of examples. Do you?
After careful planning and preparation, the Iep team members come together to write the IEP. One member will act as Iep team coordinator. Today, that will be the student's special education teacher. Another staff member has been assigned to take notes and will ensure that the IEP forms and other needed paperwork are completed. Let's watch the team in action.
Well, welcome everyone. As you know, we're here for Dominic's annual review of his IEP. And let's start with introductions. I'm Sandra Miller, who's Dominic's special education teacher.
Hi, it's nice to see everyone here. My name is Michelle Atkins, and I am Dominic's regular education teacher.
And I'm Allie Peterson. I'm Dominic's mom.
And I'm Stan Peterson, and I'm with her. Actually, I'm Dominic's dad.
I'm Dominic. Hi.
Good morning. I'm Gretchen Adams, the school psychologist.
Hello, it's nice to be here. I am Rosa Lopez. I am here from the middle school.
And I'm Diane Woods, and I'll be the note taker today.
And I'm Frances Lumsden. I'm the assistant principal and the representative for the local school district.
All right, thank you. Well, I think we're ready to start. Everybody should have copies of the draft. You can go ahead and refer to that. We're going to start with the student profile. Dominic continues to be eligible for special education in the category of specific learning disability in written expression and reading comprehension. And looking at Dominic's strengths, we've made some notes that he's a team player, gets along well with peers, he draws well, strong in math, and he likes using a computer and has good verbal skills. Mom, Dad, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I would. Dominic is a great kid with great athletic abilities. He's extremely creative, and he has...
In addition to the parents sharing their thoughts, the student is also encouraged to participate in the IEP process.
Well, Dominic, we're glad that you're here with us today. After all, this IEP is all about you, and it's nice when the student's able to attend that. How do you think school is going?
It's going okay.
What's your favorite part of the day?
Math. It's fun and easy.
Is there something that's hard for you?
Reading and writing.
Well, we're going to help you with that, okay?
Dominic, can you tell us all what you want to be when you grow up or what you're thinking about?
I don't know.
Tell them what you told me yesterday.
I want to work at a video store.
Well, that sounds like fun.
That sounds like fun, Dominic.
Dominic, is there anything else you want us to know?
No.
Thank you. We're going to do all we can to help you be successful.
And Mom and Dad, what is your vision for Dominic's future?
Well, we'd like him to go to tech school or college.
And live on his own one day.
And be happy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is probably a good time for Dominic to go back and join his classmates. It's been good having you here with us, though.
Goodbye, son.
Thanks. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, this is a good time to talk about any concerns that you might have about Dominic's education.
Well, he doesn't seem to be meeting his goals. He's getting further and further behind. He gets frustrated. He tears up. He shuts down.
He's just not getting it. He takes too much time doing his written homework.
Right, his thoughts are all over the place.
Okay. And did you get that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. We'll keep your concerns in mind as we work through the rest of the IEP. Now, the next section is where we look at transitions and special factors. Well, one transition that we know Dominic is going to have to make next year is going to be that move to middle school. And that's why we asked Ms. Lopez to join us here today.
I will help in any way I can, and I will be offering ideas as we work through the IEP.
Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, did you have any special concerns about this move to middle school for Dominic?
Well, since he's so far behind, we're afraid that he's going to have problems, that he's going to get further behind, that he's going to drown in the work, and it's going to be really, really tough for him.
Well, let's go ahead and move to the next page and discuss the first goal. Okay. Let's begin with the writing goal. Okay, and looking at the present level of academic and functional performance, Dominic is able to write a loosely organized 3 to 4 sentence paragraph with some errors in punctuation and indentation. Given assistance from his teacher and using a graphic organizer.
Excuse me, what is a graphic organizer?
Okay, that's a tool that we use to help students with their writing. I've brought a few here, something like that.
You remember, he's brought one home before.
Yes, I remember.
So using a graphic organizer, Dominic is able to add some details and has shown some progress in writing multi-paragraph essays. Dominic needs to be able to write a 3 to 5 paragraph essay that's detailed and logically organized. His weak written expression skills interfere with his ability to make grade level progress. Okay, let's read the proposed goal. Dominic will be able to write a 3 to 5 paragraph essay with the independent use of graphic organizers. Upon request, it's well organized and adequately detailed on 4 out of 5 trials. Does that sound okay to everybody?
That sounds like an ambitious goal, considering his current performance. You think it's a little too hard?
Can we change that later?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it'd be best to aim high, though, so we'll leave that as it is. Okay. Well, let's look at the next question. Does a student require assistive technology and/or services?
Why would he need assistive technology when he only has a learning disability?
Well, assistive technology is not just for a specific learning disability. For instance, Dominic tends to do much better in my class when he's journaling and writing and using a computer.
Can we put that on his IEP?
Yes, I think we can try that. We'll give him more opportunities to use the computer when he's doing his written work.
Okay. And as we discussed before, Dominic does not need related services such as physical or speech therapy, so we don't have to worry about integrating the goal. So let's move on to how we're going to measure his progress. We're going to be using work samples, such as his journaling, essays, and computer work. We'll also use the results of the writing assessments.
Will he be handwriting or using the computer to do the journaling?
He'll have the opportunity to use both. We'll keep weekly data on his progress.
After the team completes writing the goals, they will map out the student's entire school day, including non-academic time such as lunch and recess. Using the map, they will indicate all times and locations where any modifications, accommodations, aids, or other supports will be provided. If he needs assistive technology devices or services, they will be listed on the IEP as well as any training his teachers or other school personnel will need to use the device. The team will then select appropriate accommodations he may need during testing and assessments, such as extra time or taking his tests in a separate room.
All right, well, I'm going to be providing Dominic special education services and have looked at what he'll be learning in my resource classroom. I think that 30 minutes a day should meet his needs.
Wait a second, why would we reduce his special ed time when we've increased his goals and they're much more challenging?
Well, we didn't want to keep him out of the regular education classroom for too long. We don't want him to miss anything.
You know, I agree with you. We need to leave the time where it is right now. He's not where he needs to be for a kid his age.
Well, I think the parents have a very good point. Can we all agree to keep the time at 45 minutes? We can certainly revise it later.
Thank you.
The team will now list all related services that will be provided and will include how often the services will be provided, how long the sessions will be, and where the services will be provided. And to finish up, the team will write a brief explanation for any periods of time that the student will not be educated with his non-disabled peers, determine how progress toward meeting his IEP goals will be reported to his parents, and discuss whether the student will need services beyond the typical school year. The last page of the IEP form will document who attended and who participated in the meeting. The parents will be given a copy of the meeting notes and the revised draft of the IEP to take home. A copy of a document called Prior Written Notice that describes the changes being made to Dominic's educational program will also be provided to the parents.
Thank you all for coming. I think we can all agree this has been a very successful meeting.
It has. It's been really good. We so
And nice meeting you,
appreciate it.
Mr. Peterson. I hadn't met you before.
So as a summary of the spirit of the law, we want to remember that planning is something that happens with families. Does that mean you can't come to the IEP meeting with some ideas, with a draft of pieces of the IEP? Absolutely not. We want to be thinking and planning ahead of time, but anything that comes to the IEP meeting is a draft or pieces of a draft, thoughts that we're contributing at the meeting. Nothing is formally planned without the full team present. The meeting should feel like an authentic and caring conversation centered on the student and the family. It shouldn't feel like this is a contract. We are drafting a legal contract. And a lot of times our forms can look like legal contracts. We can think about those places where we might make our form more inviting. The plan should be a meaningful plan that truly provides support to access general curriculum and help the student to succeed. It should be something that teachers, that families, that students find truly useful on a day-to-day basis.